a date which will live in infamy.
Justice has been done.
We will not walk away.
Okay, we're gonna kill them. You know, they're gonna be like dead.
So when I look at traditional warfare, I think kinetic thing. Guns, I think cannons, I think tanks, I think those things. That's, to me, traditional warfare. Cyber, it's ones and zeros flying through the sky across the internet and other areas. It's hard to put your finger on that aspect. So to me, it's an easy way to delineate kinetic versus virtual.
In today's digital world, the viral spread of war and political protest can have drastic impacts. A powerful example occurred in 2010 when street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, driven by police corruption, set himself on fire. His self-immolation went viral, sparking unrest and making headlines around the world.
What is more powerful? Is it cyber or is it nuclear? And I'll just walk you through a vignette that I think is fascinating to me, and that's the Arab Spring. It started in Tunisia. It started with an individual who lit himself on fire because he had had enough of the harassment and the bullying, and that moment led to someone capturing it on video and sending that video via Twitter, via social media, and it went viral. An information bullet launched via the cyber weapon, if you will, and it changed the opinions of everyone. It rallied people to say, we have had enough, we're gonna overthrow our government. And in some ways, it was much more powerful because it lasted much longer as well.
To understand how this digital battlefield emerged, we must look back at the origins of the internet, beginning with ARPANET, a network designed to connect computers. This groundbreaking but scarcely understood innovation laid the groundwork for both extraordinary progress and unforeseen susceptibilities.
When ARPANET was first initiated, I don't think there was a sense of just how profound an invention that these researchers had really discovered, which was a system for computers to talk to each other.
The ultimate goal of the Advanced Research Project Agency, in fact, we have DARPA today, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, was to develop a means that enabled communication between DoD subject matter experts and academia. It was a network to be able to share ideas. The consumer saw how it could impact business, and the rest is history.
The reason we have cyber insecurity today is attributable to a decision, or perhaps I should say a lack of a decision, made back in the 1960s and early 70s. That decision, which is to say not to require user authentication, is the foundation today of not only some of the benefits of the internet, but also, most importantly, almost all of its vulnerabilities are attributable to that.
In the early days of computing, researchers prioritized user-friendly and accessible systems, often at the expense of robust security measures. The collective decision to forego mandatory user authentication led to systems lacking built-in mechanisms to verify and control access, paving the way for many of the challenging vulnerabilities we face in today's cybersecurity landscape.
This is the equivalent of saying, for example, that you don't need a license to drive a car, your car doesn't need to be registered, we don't need to know who's driving a car or who owns it or where it's going. We could have a system like that, it would be chaos on the roads, and in some ways, that's a little bit what we have in the internet. Cybersecurity in those early days consisted mostly of making sure that at night someone locked up the computer lab with a key. That was cybersecurity. Now, of course, we know that's not the case.
As the internet evolved and security shortcomings emerged, it became clear this new domain would have global implications, creating battlegrounds for espionage, disruption, and even acts of war.
Once nation-states realized the internet could be used, or ARPANET, or whatever you want to call it, could be used for espionage, game was over.
Traditional warfare has long been defined by 4 natural domains: land, sea, air, and space. However, with the advent of the internet, humanity created a new, man-made battlefield, cyberspace. With its non-existent borders and limitless reach, this 5th domain, unlike its predecessors, transformed the landscape of conflict and defense in unprecedented ways.
The 4 natural domains, space, air, land, and sea, developed by God. Then you have cyber, developed by man. God has done a better job.
The dawn of cyberspace introduced new methods of exploitation. In 1971, programmer Bob Thomas developed Creeper, a simple string of code, widely recognized as the first computer virus. This early experiment demonstrated how self-replicating programs could spread across networks by automatically creating copies of themselves without human input. Once activated, this harmless virus would duplicate repeatedly through basic pre-programmed instructions. Creeper laid the groundwork for modern cyber threats, highlighting how digital vulnerabilities could disrupt operations and challenge security.
Creeper software that came out, back in the early 70s, whole goal was just to kind of jam the pipes in which the network was going across. Now we're way past that. And where will we be in the next 10 years? That's my biggest concern.
Nobody ever thought, I don't think, that the internet would grow and cyberspace would grow tremendously, and that, from just a few nodes in the network, we would have millions.
Initially, ARPANET connected only a handful of nodes. Designed primarily for research, this small-scale network could not have anticipated just how rapidly the internet would expand. This lack of foresight contributed to the significant security exposures we face today.
Originally, this was thought to be sort of a very technical thing, and it grew rather slowly at first. In fact, after being invented in sort of the late 60s and very early 70s, by 1971, there were only 15 points on this baby internet, mostly at universities and military research labs. And by the end of that decade, it had only reached to a little over 100 sites on this baby internet.
As the internet evolved beyond its ARPANET roots, it reshaped not only communication, but also the nature of conflict. What began as a platform for academic and military use soon became a breeding ground for espionage and cyber warfare. This shift expanded the battlefield into cyberspace, bringing new challenges and opportunities into sharp focus.
Part of the idea under a state-sponsored cyber attack is the government has resources that are unavailable to the general public. They can tap your phone lines, they can put people in your hotel rooms. So how do we apply the techniques that only the government has to be able to capture a target, to go after somebody, to find out information about them, and use that information for some kind of effect? We could find the operator of a power plant, go into his hotel room, break into his laptop, and get the password that we may need access to, get their banking information, drain their bank account, and now cause a financial crisis for that family.
The shift from kinetic warfare to cyber warfare redefined the nature of conflict. Unlike the visible destruction of physical combat, cyber warfare brings invisible, far-reaching threats that strike without warning, often causing devastation on a scale that rivals or exceeds traditional warfare.
The kinetic nature of traditional warfare makes it much easier to determine damage, for one. I can point to a hole in the ground and say, see, that bomb, it landed, and there's the big hole in the ground. Cyber, you don't always know the impact of the cyber attack, even impact it at all. One thing is the difference is simply the discrete nature of cyber. Cyber also attacks everywhere at all times, whereas, and I'll stay with kinetic warfare, is not. It's happening at a given place in time.
The simple difference between traditional warfare and cyber warfare is that in cyber warfare, it's possible for a country to intentionally inflict damage on another country's population, its economy, its infrastructure, in a way that doesn't constitute an act of war.
Cyber warfare is probably the most profound effect on modern warfare of my lifetime.
With blurred lines of aggression and conflict, cyber warfare allows nations to engage in hostilities without a formal declaration of war. Its lack of physical borders makes it a uniquely insidious weapon.
A state-sponsored cyber attack has two pieces to it. So one is a cyber attack, which we all know what that looks like, which is some attempt to destroy a computer, a network, somehow interfere with its operations. The state-sponsored piece is a little less clear because it involves an act of a country, either acting directly through its own government or perhaps through proxies or even criminals for hire who are condoned and aided and abetted by the country.
State-sponsored cyber attacks aim to undermine adversaries through covert operations. These under-the-radar yet highly effective tactics add new dimensions to both psychological and physical warfare.
Historically, classic kinetic effects, like having a sniper on the battlefield, could infear an entire troop of people. Then we moved into weapons, atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, and now we could create fear within a region. With cyber, we now have unlimited potential to affect the psyche of any person in the world. And that means we're constantly living in a state of the unknown, constantly living in a state of fear. And the emotional toll that cyber warfare can take on a person is, there's no record of that in history that I'm aware of.
Today's digital battlefield spans the globe, with state-sponsored cyber attacks led by a few powerful nations. Armed with advanced technology and strategic expertise, they disrupt key industries and critical infrastructure, leaving civilian safety in constant jeopardy.
Well, let's talk about the big five. That's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and non-state actors. All of those do cyber activity that is highly destructive to industry, civilian efforts, and to national security.
The simplest attacks that stands out to me that opened my eyes to a lot of things was the Sony hack.
Around the globe on high alert after the cyber attack on Sony. This is the movie studios trying to erase all evidence of the interview, taking down billboards in Hollywood.
And now all eyes on the White House as officials are expected to blame North Korea for the hack attack today.
In 2014, Sony Pictures was hit by a cyber attack, widely attributed to but denied by North Korea. Allegedly in response to the interview, a film mocking leader Kim Jong-un, the hackers leaked confidential employee data and encrypted Sony's records, demanding ransom to prevent further leaks.
Like that. They were owned. They started with media. I think it was more of a test. Can they do it? They did it. So now it's, it just opens the door and exposes a lot of vulnerabilities in the commercial space.
So according to North Korea's state-run news agency, Pyongyang says, quote, "Whoever is going to frame our country for a crime should present concrete evidence. Comparing this to past cyber attacks that have nothing to do with us is all based on abstract and unrealistic claims, which will not be able to convince anybody."
The Sony hack exemplified how state actors can inflict significant damage on a nation's economy and critical private sectors through cyber means, all while avoiding direct military confrontation. This incident set the stage for a new wave of cyber warfare tactics, highlighting the evolving threats in the digital age.
Usually, countries that are engaged in cyber attacks, if it's state-sponsored, right, that we're talking about, they usually fly below the threshold of armed conflict. That's an important thing to understand, because once you hit that mark, that could become a real war.
In modern conflict, cyber attacks have emerged as the dominant strategy for achieving impactful outcomes, targeting high-value infrastructure like power grids, financial systems, and communication networks. Operating in the digital shadows, adversaries can inflict significant damage without engaging in kinetic warfare. This strategy avoids overt violence and the international backlash of traditional military actions, focusing on obstructing and destabilizing targets while staying below conventional war thresholds.
People assume that, say, hydroelectric dam or a power plant or airline controllers are these disconnected systems off the internet, some secure building you've never heard of. In reality, there's always a weak link.
So if we look at like these large power grids or water treatment facilities were developed in the 70s and 80s. They're running on old languages that are specific to that one thing. So these PLCs or programmable logic controllers, they do one thing. They open, they close. That's their job. They open, they close. Time in and time out all the time. The challenge became, we want to understand efficiency. So I want to see how often that switch opens and closes. So now they want to gather that information. So then what do? They connect it to the internet. As we became more online, especially for things inside of our power grid, we've introduced vulnerabilities by making to be more efficient.
So now that gave rise to what we're calling cyber weapons. So it's not a bullet or a plane or a bomb. It's a piece of software that runs on some electronic device that now gives us unique access for kinetic effects.
The shift to online systems improved efficiency, but also exposed critical weaknesses. A striking example emerged in 2010 with the discovery of a computer worm, revealing how cyber tools can be weaponized to corrupt vital infrastructure on an unparalleled scale.
Maybe 5 or 10 years ago, the American government had a presumption that the Iranians were using their nuclear materials for weapons. Publicly, the Iranians would say that they were using it for energy enrichment, to provide lighting for their citizenry, and there was evidence to the contrary. So what ended up happening is the intelligence community got involved. They started tracing where this nuclear enriched material was going, and they decided to take action. There's a firm belief that between the Western governments, the nuclear material was not being used for civic purposes. Over the course of about a year, headlines began to form that the Iranian nuclear power plants started to play AC/DC every day at 1:30 in the morning out of every speaker in their classified facility. After about a month of that, the ACD music got louder, and every day, every week, it got louder and louder and louder, until one day, the entire nuclear power plant melted down. That later in the news became known as Stuxnet.
Could you tell us about your experience and involvement in Stuxnet?
No.
Power lines for an enrichment facility were sabotaged.
Here in Tehran, which then connects to each and every one of their nuclear facilities as well as all their military installations.
The Iranians want to be able to disconnect from the standard internet when they're under attack, maybe even permanently, and function on their own in cyberspace.
Stuxnet showed that cyber threats weren't just about stealing data or causing minor disruptions. They could have catastrophic impacts on national security and public safety. It wasn't the first cyber attack of its caliber, and it certainly wasn't the last.
I think the Russian attack on Estonia in 2007 really, just opened up the eyes, because in the US anyway, we had 9/11 in 2001, and people were still thinking very closely in terms of, geographic borders and physical security and how do you defend yourself. People weren't in the mindset that they had to get to where we are today, where no, someone can actually get into your house without going through your front door.
In 2007, a dispute over a Soviet statue in Estonia marked a new kind of Russian interference. The conflict over relocating the bronze soldier statue led to riots, outrage, and the first cyber attack on an entire nation. Over several weeks, Estonian government, banking, media, and infrastructure websites were targeted, leaving the country cut off from online banking, news, and government services, essentially putting it under digital siege.
In the case of Estonia in 2007, one thing that they learned from this experience of having their critical infrastructure completely disrupted by the Russians is the fact that they were highly connected. So the more connected you are, the more vulnerable you are, unless you have robust, strong cyber defenses in place.
Russia had an outcome they were trying to achieve, and they didn't have to roll the tanks in there. They didn't have to roll the infantry in there. They didn't have to bomb. They still achieved their outcomes via cyber means.
Cyber weaponry, in terms of scalability, is profound because it's usually software, which means there isn't a central manufacturing plant in Detroit. There isn't one place where these are developed. We can have colleagues in the UK, with colleagues in the US, with colleagues in Australia, working on a weapon 24/7 because it's software.
And so when you're attacking something that is not what is a normally recognized viable target, and you're making an economic attack, you're verging way off of traditional warfare.
I personally believe that all citizens are actually affected by cyberspace operations every day.
Since World War I, gathering intelligence and conducting surveillance have been crucial. These practices evolved through World War II and the Cold War, leading to modern signals intelligence. Established by the NSA in the late 1990s and early 2000s, signals intelligence intercepts and analyzes electronic communications, making it a vital tool in the cyber domain.
Those who think getting a car phone is not for them, whatever the reason, haven't kept up with the booming industry of cellular radio telephones. Right now, businessmen and women are major users of radio telephones where cellular is in service. But more people will take advantage of cellular as its benefits become apparent. Eventually, seeing people using cellular phones may seem as commonplace as someone checking time on an electronic watch, figuring on an electronic calculator, or programming on an electronic computer.
In the late 90s and early 2000s, you'll have a category of the military called signals. And it was meant for telecommunications. This is NSA spying on your telephone. And what we ended up learning was that signals weren't just your cell phones, they were not just radios. Consumers in the 90s and 2000s started adopting devices and computers, and so did governments. So that evolved, perhaps in the early 2000s, into cyber warfare. And for at least the past 25 years, we've now had a dedicated practice under multiple names that is specifically geared to this kind of attack and defense.
The late 1990s and early 2000s marked a surge in internet expansion and the rise of dot-com companies, transforming the digital landscape. This explosive growth set the stage for modern cyber warfare, as both consumers and governments rapidly embraced new technologies and entered the digital era. Constant and multifaceted online connectivity became the new norm.
One of the things people don't realize is how easy it is to find somebody. During my time in the intelligence community, I was part of an organization known as the Office of Target Pursuit. And in the early 2000s, we were responsible for what became known publicly as the Al-Qaeda Senior Leadership Hit List. And the idea was, given a name, we would find them, often within 30 minutes, anywhere in the world.
The top attribution in terms of cyber attacks is China, Russia, and Iran. And they primarily attacking most of the time of NATO countries.
They don't have the same mindset that we have in terms of approvals, in terms of authorities, and things of that nature. So we all have similar capabilities, but in the West, we follow more rules before we pull the trigger. In the East, not so much.
The biggest difference between West and East is that there are certain rules that are followed in certain countries that are not followed in others. It's about rules-based activity.
Military strategies, government policies, and rules of engagement in the West and East shape how nations approach the cyber domain. Should individuals or governments be responsible for online security?
We cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security and our economy. And that's why earlier today, I signed a new executive order that will strengthen our cyber defenses by increasing information sharing and developing standards to protect our national security, our jobs, and our privacy.
National cyber defense in Western countries, it's seen as a duty to the citizens, and it's on behalf of the citizens. It's doing it to make the country safer. Often in some of the Eastern-based countries, it's just a mandate, and there's no options. It's just more dictatorial in terms of they must do certain things versus voluntary.
You certainly don't want to crimp innovation. The United States is perhaps one of the most innovative countries in the world. So there was a tendency to have very limited and very light regulation, and industry pushed back on it, understandably, as they do with every technological invention. And yet we missed an opportunity.
But now Congress must act as well by passing legislation to give our government a greater capacity to secure our networks and deter attacks.
I can say that I was in Washington at the time talking to people who were trying to write legal documentation to go to the United Nations. And those documents, they wanted to have some sort of international agreement on what constitutes an act of war in a cyber attack. And that space was never defined. And so that let loose an awful lot of mess.
That means that it's okay for some countries to condone ransomware gangs operating inside their borders. Russia's a great example of that. And we do not have an international agreement that that's a bad idea.
This ambiguity raises critical questions. How can we identify if we are under attack from another state? And what does cyber warfare actually look like? Are we at war?
We're absolutely engaged in cyber warfare every day. In 2023, $8 trillion was lost as a result of cyber attacks. They estimate upwards of 2,000 attacks per day, an attack every 39 seconds. Does that show we're under constant attack? Absolutely.
Classically, most people think of cyber as they click the link and they got a virus, or they got a phone scam from some kind of automated bot. In reality, there's a classification of cyber weaponry called zero-click malware. And the idea is if we get something like your phone number, we can send you a text message that compromises your phone, gives us remote access to it, and deletes all evidence that we're in your phone at all. So now, if we want to target somebody, we can send a zero-click malware, get access to their device, and therefore get access to everything they connect to, their home Wi-Fi, their office Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi of their neighbors. And we can start forming this collective graph of who they're speaking with, where they're going, who they're talking to, what time of day do they connect, what data is coming out of your phone, what apps are you using. And we can build a profile of a target so accurate that we now know everything about you.
So there are, I think, countries like Russia, countries like China, they want to see the defeat of Western nations. They want to see the fall of Western nations. So one thing that I know these countries have is patience. They're targeting our children. They're inculcating something in their mindset very young in their growing up, so they could literally change our entire society, starting with our kids.
Some nations use cyber tactics not only for immediate obstruction, but also to drive long-term societal change. By targeting youth during their formative years, these tactics aim to subtly influence perceptions and reshape societal values over time. Social media platforms play a crucial role in this strategy, gathering extensive user data and shaping opinions.
All social media is bad. You know, Meta's collecting the same amount of data that TikTok's collecting. But because they were originally owned by China, everyone has this root fear that it's a cyber warfare situation where they're tracking us and they're using all this data to eventually go against us. So are they tracking our biometrics through our eyes when we're watching our screen? Would they be able to replicate who we are? Are they tracking what we like? Are they pushing things out to specific groups of people so, we're learning the wrong things in our country? The US cares because if China has the ability to access everyone's data, I could use, 16-year-old kids' information to get to her father's who might happen to be in the CIA.
Our data is a commodity today. It's sold, it's used, it's manipulated, and most of it's done for, we use it for advertising purposes so that we could be, so companies could be more efficient on what they put in front of you so you could buy it. But if you look at it from a nefarious standpoint, the information that's openly provided from our homes, from, think of Rokus and Alexas and our Roombas and all these things that are collecting data, they're storing that data. We don't know where, it could be in servers in other countries, but they're mapping out our entire world and our entire everything we do. And that should scare everybody.
Companies don't really want users to know all of the data that they're collecting because then you're going to have issues with your consumers. Consumers don't want that much data being collected on them, and then they're going to have to deal with the fact that consumers are actively going to ask for them to not collect certain data or collect certain data. And once you start collecting data, it's actually, from a company perspective, it's very hard to separate. So companies really don't want to give users that right or make it as easy as it is because it's not easy for companies to give you that right.
Social media has become a critical battleground in the cyber domain, where its vast stores of data are both a valuable asset and a major vulnerability. As social media platforms increasingly replace traditional news sources, the hacking of trusted official accounts can have serious and boundless consequences.
Right now, we classically think of warfare as targeting soldiers, generals, political officials. But one of the more interesting stories was actually from the Obama administration. So during that time, the Twitter account of the Associated Press got hacked.
Breaking news, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. Less than 140 characters causing the stock market to drop 150 points, almost immediately.
As we learned a little bit more about what happened, clearly it was false. Obama was fine. But what we ended up finding was that the Syrian activists within Syria took credit for this. And within 2-3 months, the American Department of State released a report that said it was actually ISIS that caused the attack that hacked the Twitter account. As we reflect back on the citizenry, it turns out they got into the Twitter account because of a social media weak password. So that human sitting wherever they were on their phone tweeting used a weak password that ended up funding ISIS for almost 20 years.
A weak password chosen by just one individual can open the door for adversaries to launch attacks affecting an entire nation. While social media offers unprecedented connectivity, it has also become a momentous battleground in the digital landscape. The nature of these platforms allows individual security lapses to be exploited, leading to widespread tampering and manipulation of national events.
Would you consider social media to be a weapon?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think social media can be a weapon, just like any other technology, any Internet of Things technology, right? We are connected through so many different avenues, and I don't think people realize that because in our head, we're connecting for efficiency, right?
I think human beings have always sought to develop things that create convenience without necessarily having an idea of what the implications of those things are. And as builders and creators, it's just not in our capacity to fully understand the unintended consequences of a thing. That's not going to stop us from building.
When you think about information warfare, or also known as IW, okay, IW has components such as cyber warfare operations like cyber ops, but also electronic warfare. You have military deception, targeting capabilities, all these things put together to do one thing and one thing only: disrupt or corrupt information. And why is this so important? Because if you have the ability to do that at a national level, you will corrupt the minds of millions, if not billions of people. And that kind of effect is long-term, way different than just compromising systems. Okay, this is the real deal.
Cyber warfare isn't just about compromising systems. It has the power to shape public opinion on a massive scale. These psychological operations target the very fabric of society, altering perceptions and creating lasting impacts.
The most profound reminder that we were in this new cyber war was during the election period, when election interference began to be mentioned in the United States.
We are talking about a slow leak every day, a new batch. And WikiLeaks dropped thousands of stolen emails from the chair of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, John Podesta. Within days, 20,000 emails would emerge. They were embarrassing.
WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
So where'd WikiLeaks get the emails? That's where today's indictment comes in.
I had the great privilege of serving at the National Security Agency for several years. And during that period of time, in the 2016 presidential elections, the United States discovered, belatedly, that Russia was seeking to interfere in that election. And there's a 5-volume bipartisan report of the United States Senate that details in hundreds of pages the nature of Russian attempts to influence that election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And we saw how the internet could be perverted for the purposes of projection of national power by a malicious authoritarian government.
You fast forward a little bit then to what I'll call in many ways like that COVID era, where by and large, most people had to work from home, and because they're using social media so much more often, you had things like fakes coming out there.
It would alarm me. I mean, I used to think boogie monsters were scary. Deep fakes, if I was a little kid, I'd be like, what world am I going into? Who do I trust? Humans have an innate need to belong. Humans have an innate need to feel safe. With misinformation and disinformation, pulls the carpet off underneath their feet.
Can you imagine the day before the election, a deep fake video coming out and a candidate saying something racist or something horrific?
You know, you create something like that and you push that to the masses, to the populace, right? There will be an effect. You will actually, for real, get people to take action. And that could be against a candidate, for a candidate, or whatever that may be. So can social media actually affect elections and democracy? The answer is yes, 100%. Can we fight it? Also, yes. We can fight it. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have the capabilities to do that. We just have to basically do it, right?
Destabilization across nations, across countries, across continents, that's powerful.
Social media substantially impacts democratic processes, but with the right tools and strategies, we can counteract these effects. Combating cyber destabilization, which seeks to sow discord between nations, requires a collective effort and vigilance. Every citizen plays a role in this global cyber conflict, and understanding that national security, economic stability, and personal safety are interconnected is vital.
The best thing that citizens can do is understand that they are part of a global war, and that is involved in their national security and their economic security and their personal security. We're all working together. Every time you see something that you might react to, take a pause. Ask, who wants me to be upset about this? Who wants me to take an action? In just a few seconds, you can make a better decision. And then you can be part of the war against all of this.
The COVID-19 pandemic marked a turning point in the shift to a fully digital world. With lockdowns in place, the global workforce adopted remote solutions, accelerating the transition to digital technologies for everyday operations.
Classically, pre-COVID, there was almost a physical border between our work and our home. We went to work on a corporate laptop, in a corporate office, on a corporate network, and when we left that environment, it was completely separate for our personal lives. Now we're accessing business data over our home laptops, over our personal cell phones, so the compromise vector, the amount of devices which introduce risk into an environment exploded. Instead of worrying just about the corporate laptop, we have to worry about your kid's laptop. Instead of worrying about your corporate phone, we have to worry about your phone. And there's an interesting privacy balance now, where in order to secure your personal laptop, we have to install corporate security monitoring, which means the company can watch where you're going and what you're looking at and what you're clicking on. And how do you fuse those two worlds when you log into your medical records, but you're also checking your work email? These two worlds are combined, which makes any individual citizen a target.
The pandemic led to a nearly fully digitalized world, generating vast quantities of data. Before the development of AI, these large volumes of data acted as a protective barrier, similar to finding a needle in a haystack. Today, with AI's evolution, actors with the right tools and knowledge can exploit specific data in profoundly impactful ways.
With the evolution of AI and the ubiquitous amount of data that there is out there, the evolution of cybersecurity is going to be the merger with information security and the data governance field. So I think the cybersecurity world as we know it is really going to evolve into the broader industry, and it needs to.
Technology, especially software, depreciates like a head of lettuce. All right, think about that. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. You come to a war with the army that you have, not with the one you want. Well, in 5 years from now, I'm not even clear about what type of capabilities and capacities exist.
We're just at the cusp, the very beginnings of understanding how AI will influence cybersecurity and cyber defense. We all sense it's going to have a very profound effect, and yet we can't quite figure out exactly what that's going to be.
War has historically demanded immense financial resources to build and sustain military capabilities, with inflated defense budgets due to the need for physical assets like armies, artillery, and heavy machinery. In contrast, cyber warfare shifts the focus from the size of your arsenal to technological expertise and strategic prowess. For the first time, a nation's strength is defined more by its knowledge and technology than by traditional military might.
A lot of these technologies that we launch are extremely expensive. You know, it's a kind of a fire and forget. Our defense budget is ridiculous. Every year, it gets up to the $1 trillion mark. And citizens are wondering, what do we get for all that? Well, a lot of that money goes in sustainment. We got B-52s that are as old as I am. If you think about all we've done is to be able to put new generation engines on these technologies and expect them to survive another 25 years.
You're able to see all the kinetic things we do. When a tank rolls down or an artillery barrage occurs, you see that. And that's expensive. Fuel's expensive, rounds are expensive, Hellfire missiles are expensive. Creating an exploit using ChatGPT, a couple of minutes, the right access, the right knowledge, It's relatively inexpensive. And the effects on the other side of that are profound. So it's flipping the whole paradigm, where you don't need to have these large-scale wars, where you don't need this large-scale kinetic effects. The things you could do in cyber are amazing, and most of the times people don't even know it's happening until it's too late.
At the beginning of the war, Russia unleashed a cyber campaign of misinformation and disinformation. They sent out false text to Ukrainian citizens, warning them that the banks were running out of money, information about where bomb shelters were located that was erroneous, et cetera. So we saw an integrated campaign on the part of Russia using cyber to take down the power grid, to attack their websites online, and to prevent Ukrainian citizens from accessing government websites in an integrated way.
One of the areas that was highly impacted was small business. The cyber attacks on small business were extraordinary, and businesses did not have the tools to address them. And so those breaches can shut a business down. The economic impact of destroying small businesses is enormous. The modern world has blurred the lines between what is a national security issue, what is a economic security issue, a business concern, and what is a private concern. Because the entire apparatus can be interlinked and attacked. And so a vulnerability to the commercial sector or to critical infrastructure is a vulnerability to the populace and also to the nation.
Current Russia-Ukraine war has been a little bit of a laboratory. This battlefield, cyber battlefield, will be studied by military tacticians for years to come as really the first example of using cyber in an integrated way in an armed conflict.
You do have weapon systems for cyber warfare, okay? Some of them are classified, some of them are not. But they're real, they're physical weapon systems, and they're options that commanders can use to cause effect in a warfare, in any kind of conflict. It's an option. You can choose a ship, you can choose a fighter jet, a satellite, soldiers, but you can also choose cyber as your weapon.
Nobody goes to war tomorrow. There's generally a sequence of staging events. First, you may pre-position your troops. Before you pre-position your troops, you need to train them. And while you're training them, you need to manufacture enough military supplies to equip them once they're in combat. Cyber is no different. So if we're going to war with a country, we classically think about bombs and planes and bullets. But wouldn't it be interesting if Monday night we turn off their power? On Saturday, a week later, we turn off their water. That has such a profound psychological impact, we may not need the bombs and the planes and the bullets. To prepare for that kind of combat, to prepare for that kind of cyber campaign, you utilize nation-state capabilities to get into supply chains. What kind of equipment is the power supply company using? What kind of computer hardware is the water treatment facility using? And based on that insight, you start writing exploits for them that you pre-position weeks, months, to years in advance. So in the same way that we have military bases around the world for quick reaction capability, so have we pre-positioned cyber capabilities around the world with different adversaries and defensively with different allies.
Remote cyber access enables new levels of effectiveness, allowing unmanned vehicles, ships, and planes to conduct surveillance and engage in combat operations without risking the lives of soldiers.
When we think about unmanned vehicles, and my time in Iraq in 2004, we launched the Predator in Iraq, but we flew it from Las Vegas. Why send an expensive $30, $50, $100 million aircraft to go out there snooping around when I could send a very inexpensive drone with the same capability that could transmit the information back to my leadership immediately? These drones that are being developed today that are, the size of my hand, and you can put a weapon system on them, but you can also use these particular drones as jammers. And when the Ukrainians cannot communicate with where their teams are located on the ground, fighting against a challenging, Russian army, that keeps the leadership up at night. If you think about the basic technology and how these drones are flown, it's the network that keeps these technologies up there.
What we're seeing today is the militarization of space. People didn't really think about that, right? And so what they're realizing now is, should we have better secure systems for space systems, space assets? That thought is being had today because we didn't have that conversation 30 years ago. They're now realizing, oh my gosh, there's so much is dependent upon space assets and satellite transmissions that we really need to make sure that those are secure. Should there be a separate mechanism for that transmission?
Nearly all modern technology relies on satellites and space-based assets. From remote-controlled military vehicles to critical infrastructure and GPS navigation, these capabilities are essential to daily operations. Due to their physical distance and costly accessibility, protecting them is a top priority for governments. As reliance on these assets grows, so does the urgency to secure them against potential threats. Robust security measures for space systems are now more critical than ever.
To understand all of this, right, when you think of space, there's three segments we have to be mindful of. You have the ground segment, which is usually the ground station where often people work. You have the link, using the electromagnetic spectrum to send information and receive it. And then you have the asset in space. And so if we're talking about a cyber Pearl Harbor or a space Pearl Harbor, it's likely going to be via the cyber domain, compromising one of those links.
The crucial role of space assets in modern warfare has created an urgent need to secure these vital systems. As the art of war evolves and the cyberspace domain gains prominence, a new doctrine awaits. The most significant combat threats are no longer expected in the traditional domains of land, sea, and air, but in data-rich environments in cyberspace.
A couple of Chinese colonels wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare. And in that book, they outlined how the Chinese would be successful using cyberspace, using the information environment, not getting into an air, land, and sea battle with us, and how they can use space as well to their advantage. Russia, via one of the direct ascent ASAT weapons, they shot down one of their own satellites. And at the time, I was at United States Space Command watching this as it was happening live. And we're watching this, and it leaves all this debris. And the reason we're concerned with this debris is there's something called the Kessler syndrome, which is basically that debris moving at a speed of potentially 17,000 miles an hour may hit another satellite, may hit another piece of capability there, and lead to more debris, which then can lead to more debris. And the next thing you know, we're back to an era where we don't even have space-based capabilities anymore because all of it has been destroyed. There are over 40,000 objects in space right now today.
I think that we've created a massive area that's kind of out of control that is extremely hard to police. And so if you can imagine having your map suddenly shut down, and not just you, everybody, having the traffic lights suddenly all be red, I think that's the kind of situation where you would notice that an attack had a big impact on you. Having your electricity suddenly shut off, but your entire city's electricity shut off.
Cyber warfare has reshaped conflict, integrating with traditional military tactics and expanding into new domains like space. With satellites and digital networks critical to infrastructure, vulnerabilities in cyberspace can lead to extensive and devastating consequences. A cyber attack could shut down an entire city, interfering with essential services like electricity and traffic control, causing both mass physical and psychological harm. As technology advances, so must our expertise to ensure national readiness on the cyber battlefield.
So much of cyber defense is based around this idea of compliance. It's basically a checklist. Did you set your passwords? Did you turn on the cryptography? Do you have all these different complex settings enabled in a certain way? And you run through your checklists, you make sure you sign them off, and you kind of forget about them. In reality, what ends up happening is the adversary is always evolving. They're constantly running experiments. So our checklist that we ran a month ago may have no relevance to the current threats of which our adversaries have.
In America right now, depending on what you read, we have between 500 and 600,000 unfilled cyber jobs, right? And globally, it's 3.5 million. 3.5 million. Operational people have a job to do where they go every day and they grind out on a thing, right? We average 5 days a year of skills enhancement in the U.S. for our cyber warfare.
Innovation back then was innovative. Innovation today blows people's minds. We found the value of cybersecurity as a strategic asset. We saw both its offensive as well as its defensive capabilities. We realized very quickly that we don't put as much emphasis on the defensive side, and we should.
Key piece going forward is the cyber workforce development aspect of it.
If we don't provide that level of training, realistic training in the cyber domain, the vulnerability goes off the charts.
Yeah, I don't think anyone understood what their vulnerabilities were, and I don't know that they do now, and no one's taking away my iPhone. I really enjoy it, and I think everybody loves the devices that they have. So I think that we just have to find a way to better secure what we have, because people love that technology.
Policy is always behind. So when you're trying to regulate something, by the time that you regulate that one something is already way ahead of you. They don't know the domain. How can you operate in a domain that you don't know? And how can you regulate a domain that you don't know? How can you create policy if you don't even understand how a network works?
Artificial intelligence combined with potentially quantum computing coming up in a few years, the type of advanced communications we get with 5G communications are all going to combine in an explosive way. We sense that it's going to be explosive growth. We've already seen that. But exactly forecasting what it's going to be in the future is really anyone's guess. And the one thing we can say is it's going to be profound.
When we look at the problems today in cyberspace, it's because of, it's us, it's people. We're the ones that click on the links. We're the ones that click on, we're the ones that get phished. And when we look at the attacks that are happening today, it's rudimentary. We haven't even, the hard stuff hasn't even happened yet.
Almost all of us have been indirectly or directly been involved in a state-sponsored attack. I actually think it's not just the citizens' role, but the US and the global role of educating the citizens on making sure that they know how to protect themselves online, because once us citizens feel empowered to protect ourselves online, we're also going to feel empowered to protect our country.
We are 100% engaged in cyber warfare, and we always will be.